Kyle had always wandered alone through the forgotten ruins of war across the stars for him. Scavenging was survival and silence was company. On one such day, beneath the fading glow of twin suns, he found a trail of scorched ground and broken metal, the kind that told of a battle not too long ago. He followed it with cautious steps, his eyes searching for scrap worth taking. When he saw movement in the wreckage, his hand went to the knife on his belt. He expected some wounded beast or scavenger, but what he found instead was a figure cloaked in silver armor, half buried in shattered rock. Her chest rose and fell shallow, her hand clutching a strange bow with arrows that looked nothing like human. They were shards of crystal threaded, with energy veins that still glowed faintly, though several were snapped in half. He approached carefully, his boots crunching on ash. The woman's eyes opened sharp and golden like molten fire, and for a moment he felt the weight of something dangerous pressing into him, yet she could not rise, her strength failing her. Kyle crouched beside her and reached for one of the arrows, its surface cracked and split like glass. He turned it in his hand, curious. She did not stop him, only watched her breath. Uneven. "You are not one of us," she whispered. Her voice steady but weak. Kale only gave a small shrug. He had heard that line before in different forms across different planets. Humans were almost always treated as outsiders. He slid the broken arrows into his satchel along with his tools and said simply, "I can fix these, maybe not like they were, but I can try." The woman studied him silently, as if weighing his words against some hidden truth. Kale did not know who she was to him. T.O. was just another survivor left behind by war. He had no thought of titles or empires, only the immediate need to keep her alive. He pulled a water flask from his pack and pressed it to her lips. She drank, though her gaze never left his face. He sat, up camp near the ruins, using the shell of a collapsed transport for shelter. His fire was small and shielded by metal plates. He worked on the arrows under its light-bending scraps of alloy to reinforce the cracked crystal. He hummed quietly, too, himself, as he shaped the metal the way he had done countless times with human weapons. Though these were unlike anything he had touched before, they seemed alive, humming faintly even as he bound them with steel. The woman spoke little, only watching him, her golden eyes reflecting the fire. Sometimes they softened when he handed her food or when he tightened the wraps on her wounds. She did not thank him, but he saw something in her expression, some conflict that made her grip the bow tighter. Each time she looked at him, Kale did not ask for her name, nor did she offer it. Instead, he focused on the arrows, testing their weight, balancing them as best he could when he slid the first repaired shaft back into her quiver. She raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, only closed her hand over it like it was a piece of her soul returned to her. As the night deepened, Kale leaned back against the cold hull, his mind drifting. He thought about the oddness of it all, a human scavenger fixing weapons that belonged to a warrior from a people far beyond his reach. He did not know the stories whispered about her across the galaxy. He did not know that the one whose arrows he mended had once commanded entire fleets to kneel. All he saw was someone, broken and left behind, and for reasons he could not explain, he felt it mattered that she stood again. The woman finally spoke, her voice quieter, almost softer. "Why help me? You gain nothing from this." Kale stared at the fire before answering. "Because no one else will, and because broken things deserve a chance to be whole again." His words hung in the air between them, and she lowered her gaze, not replying. But in that silence, something shifted unseen, a spark that neither of them yet understood. The morning came slow and pale across the ruined battlefield. Smoke still lingered in the air, though the winds carried most of it away. Kale rose from his place beside the fire, stretching his arms, before checking on the woman. She had sat upright during the night, her bow laid across her knees and her repaired arrows close at hand. Her eyes were sharp again, though her body was still weak. She looked at him as if trying to read the truth of who he was beneath the dirt and worn clothes. Kyle knelt by the pile of broken shafts he had gathered and continued his work, his hands steady as he bound human steel into alien crystal. He worked with the focus of someone used to building life out of scraps. She watched him without speaking until finally she asked, "You have no fear of me, why?" Her voice carried the kind of weight that might have once made soldiers tremble. Kale only gave her a small glance before returning to his task. Fear wastes time if you wanted me dead, you would not have waited this long. She tilted her head at that answer as though it unsettled her, more than open fear might have. He pressed the metal strip against the crystal until the glow steadied again, then set the arrow aside. She shifted slowly, adjusting her cloak, her hand brushing against the ground where symbols were etched. Kyle noticed them, but said nothing. He had no need to press for answers. She was a warrior, that much was clear. Her armor, though cracked and scorched, was far beyond anything a mercenary or raider would wear. There was refinement in its design marks of status carved into the plating. He did not say it aloud, but he wondered what kind of soldier carried weapons like this. When he brought her a portion of dried meat, she accepted it reluctantly, chewing in silence, her golden eyes still fixed on him. "Where are your people?" she asked Kale, let out a short laugh. "Scattered, gone, some left for colonies. Others died in battles like this one now. It is only me and the stars." She studied him with something close to curiosity. "And yet you live as if you belong nowhere." Kale shrugged, setting another arrow aside. "Belonging is a word people use until they lose their place after that. You only keep moving or you stop and die." His words made her look away for a long time, her hands tracing the repaired shaft he had given her. He could see her struggling with thoughts. She would not speak as the day wore on. Kale guided her to drink again and to stretch her injured side, though she resisted. At first she allowed it. His hands were careful when he tightened the bandages over her ribs. He had treated wounds before his life, as a scavenger had given him plenty of scars and lessons. He could feel the tension in her body whenever he touched the armor near her heart, but she did not pull away. When the sun dipped low, he set aside the work to rest. She finally asked him the question that had been building in her silence. "Why do you care if I survive?" Kale looked at her, his face plain and voice steady. "Because you should not be left here broken and forgotten. I have seen too much of that already." The woman looked at him for a long time, then finally spoke. "If you knew who I was, you would not speak so easily." But Kale only gave a tired smile. "Maybe, maybe not, but right now you are someone with arrows in pieces and I can fix them, that is enough." That answer silenced her again, but this time, it was not the silence of suspicion. It was something heavier, something uncertain. She lay back against the wreckage, her eyes still open, watching him as he tended to the fire. Kale felt her gaze on him, but did not return it. Instead, he sharpened, the edge of one of his tools humming low to himself. The night fell deeper, stars cutting sharp lines above the broken land, and for the first time since he had found her, she allowed herself to sleep. Kyle remained awake for hours longer, listening to the distant rumble of ships somewhere beyond the horizon, his hand resting near his knife. Not because he feared her, but because he feared what might come searching for her. He did not know the truth of who she was. He did not know that the woman who slept beside his fire was more than a survivor, more than a soldier. She was the queen of an empire that ruled through fear and blood, an empire that would kill to have her back. And he was now tangled in her fate without even realizing it. Kyle rose with the light of the third day and found the woman already awake, standing unsteady. But with her bow in hand, she moved with effort, each step reminding her of the wounds she carried. Yet her presence carried a quiet authority that made Kyle pause. He offered her a hand to steady herself, but she refused, lifting her chin as though pride alone would hold her upright. She carried the repaired arrows he had given back to her quiver and examined them in silence. The glow within them pulsed, strong again though the shape was not perfect. Kale's human steel had made them heavier, more solid than they were before. She finally spoke as she tested the bowstring. "These feel different. They do not sing like before, but they feel stronger." Kyle wiped sweat from his brow and answered, "Sometimes broken things cannot be made the same again, but that does not mean they are weaker. It just means they are new." The woman lowered the arrow and looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing those words against truths she had always known. Then she asked, "What is your name?" He hesitated, then said simply, "Kale." For the first time, her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Kale, the fixer of broken arrows," she said softly, almost as if trying the words against the air. He gave no answer, only returned to his work. But he noticed the way she held the bow tighter now, as if his repairs had become more than just survival for her. The day grew long and they walked together among the ruins, Kale searching for food and metal scraps while she followed, slowly leaning on her bow when her strength faltered. He said nothing, only slowed his pace. She observed the way he scavenged every corner, how he turned shattered armor into tools and wrecked ships into shelter. She began to realize that his resilience was not luck, it was choice. Every act of survival was carved from nothing. As they settled by a new fire that night, she finally broke her silence. My people do not see strength in kindness. They see it only in conquest and fear, yet you mend weapons. For someone you do not know, you share your food without demand, you speak with no concern for my station. Kale raised an eyebrow and replied, because power built on fear does not last. I have seen it collapse too many times. She narrowed her golden eyes, but there was no anger, only curiosity. And yet you survive without armies, without banners. What holds you together? Kale poked at the fire with a shard of metal. The will to keep going, and the choice not to become the same as the ones who destroyed everything. His words stirred something in her, though she did not show it. She thought of the throne waiting for her, and the countless voices that feared her name. She thought of the way her generals spoke of humans as nothing but tools or prey. Yet here sat one who refused to bend or beg. Later, as the stars stretched across the sky, she leaned closer, her voice low. If I told you that my people would see you as nothing, if I told you that they would punish me for even allowing you near me, what would you say? Kale met her gaze without hesitation. Then I would say they are blind. Her breath caught at the bluntness of the answer. No trembling, no hesitation, only calm certainty. He had no idea how dangerous those words would be if spoken before her court, and yet he spoke them as if truth itself was simple. She lay back against the metal hull, her golden eyes reflecting the firelight, and whispered words he barely caught. You are unlike anything I have known. Kale said nothing to that, but he felt the weight of it pressing into the silence around them. Far beyond the broken hills, shadows moved, ships gliding through the atmosphere without sound. They bore the colors of an empire built on blood, their scans sweeping across the ruins, searching for their lost queen. She did not know it yet, but her people were closing in, and Kale, by mending her arrows and keeping her alive, had already painted a mark upon himself that no human should ever bear. The night was still when Kale felt the ground tremble faintly. He lifted his head from where he sat near the fire and listened. The sound was distant but steady, not the crash of storms or the rumble of beasts. It was the hum of engines. Moving through the air, the woman opened her golden eyes as if she too sensed it, her hand tightening around the bow. Kyle stood and scanned the horizon until he saw faint streaks of light cutting through the dark skyships, moving in formation. Knew at once they were not raiders nor scavengers. They flew too precise, their shapes sharp and disciplined. The woman's face grew hard as she whispered words he almost did not hear. They have found me. Kale turned to her in confusion. But before he could ask who she truly was, the first of the ships descended with a low growl of thrusters. Sand and ash whipping across the ruins, armored figures emerged, their weapons gleaming under the pale moonlight. They moved with the training of soldiers, their steps in unison. Kale's hand went to his knife, though he knew it would mean little against such force. The woman rose with effort, her cloak falling aside as she stood tall. Despite her wounds, she knocked one of the arrows he had repaired, the glow within it steady and alive again. When the soldiers saw her, they dropped to one knee in perfect order, but not out of reverence. Their leader barked a command and raised his weapon at Kale. Human, step away from her now. The soldier's voice carried the authority of someone who believed their word was law. Kale did not move. He stood still between them and the woman, his knife held tight, though useless. She looked at him for a moment, her face unreadable, then drew the arrow back, with strength that seemed to return to her in that instant. The crystal flared bright as fire, and when she released it, the air cracked. The arrow struck the soldier's weapon and shattered it into molten fragments. The others pulled back in shock. Kale staggered at the force of it, but regained his footing. The woman's voice rang out sharp and commanding, "You will not touch him." For the first time, Kale heard the tone of command that came not from a warrior, but from someone who had ruled. Others, it sent a chill down his spine. The soldiers hesitated, caught between obedience to their queen and the orders they had been given. The leaders snarled and signaled two more to advance their weapons aimed at Kale. One fired a shot that ripped. Through the air, Kale dropped to the ground as it seared past his shoulder. Before he could rise again, the woman loosed another arrow, striking the ground before them. The explosion of light knocked them backward. She swayed from the effort, her wounds not yet healed, but she did not fall. Her presence alone seemed to hold them at bay. Kale rushed to her side, grabbing her arm to steady her. She pulled free, but not harshly. Her golden eyes fixed on the soldiers. "Return to your ships. Tell the generals, I am not theirs to command." Her words were like a blade drawn across old loyalties. The soldiers shifted uneasily, their discipline wavering. They had come to retrieve their queen, but now they saw her stand beside a human scavenger, and they could not reconcile what they witnessed. The leader spat in frustration and signaled the retreat, though his glare promised that this was not the end. The soldiers withdrew back to their ships. The engines roared, and soon the night was still again, though the air still smelled of burning metal. Kale turned to her, his chest still heaving from the chaos. "Who are you?" he demanded at last. She looked at him long and hard before speaking, her voice no longer soft or guarded. "I am more than a soldier. Kale, I am their queen, the ruler of the empire whose shadow stretches across these stars." Her words fell heavy like stone. Kale stared at her in silence, the pieces of the puzzle crashing into place, the soldiers, the authority, the weapons, all of. It suddenly made sense, and yet it felt unreal to him, that the woman he had given food and water, the one whose arrows he had repaired, was the same queen spoken of in whispers of terror across colonies. He stepped back as the weight of her truth settled on him, but she reached for his arm, stopping him, her voice gentler now. "I should have told you, but I did not know if you would still see me as I am, or only as the title they fear." Kyle's hand tightened on his knife, though he knew it would do nothing. He looked at her not with fear, but with something deeper. "You should have told me sooner." She bowed her head for a moment, as if carrying a burden far older than their meeting. "And yet you stayed even when you did not." "No." The fire crackled between them, but the silence carried more than flame. Kyle did not move away, though his mind churned with doubt and unease. He had fixed her arrows without knowing he had sheltered the queen of an empire, and now her enemies were his as well. The silence after her revelation stretched long into the night. Kale sat by the fire, staring into the flames, while she stood with her bow still in hand, her golden eyes fixed on him. She had spoken the truth that she was queen of. The empire feared across the galaxy, and though her body carried wounds, her presence was unbroken. She seemed taller, stronger, even though only hours before she had been leaning against wreckage for support. Kale's hands rested on his knees, his mind circling the weight of what she had said all his life. He had heard whispers of her empire, tales of fleets that burned entire colonies of rulers, who silenced worlds with nothing but fear. Now that same power stood beside him. No longer rumor or story, but flesh and blood, and she was the same one he had given food to, the same one he had helped stand when she could not rise. Finally, Kale lifted his gaze and asked her the question burning in his chest. "Why did you let me mend your arrows? Why did you stay silent when you knew who you were?" Her lips pressed into a thin line before she answered, "Because I did not know if you would see me as a person or only as a throne. Too many around me bow out of fear. They do not speak truth. They only obey. I wanted to see what you would do without knowing." Her words carried no arrogance, only weariness. Kale studied her expression and saw the cracks beneath the crown, the endless weight she carried. Though he could not yet name it, he shook his head slowly. "So you used me to test me?" She shook her head sharply. "No, Kale. I trusted you without reason, and you gave me back my strength when I had none. That is not a test, that is a bond." Kyle leaned back against the metal wall of the ruin, his knife resting across his lap. "A bond with a queen of a ruthless empire. What am I supposed to do with that?" Her eyes softened at his words. She stepped closer, her shadow falling across him. "You are supposed to do nothing. You owe me nothing, yet I owe you more than I have owed anyone." Her voice trembled, though it carried strength. Kale searched her face and realized she meant every word. Her empire might see him as nothing, but she saw him as the one who kept her alive. He felt the tension ease from his shoulders, though the fear of what was coming remained. She sat down across from him, laying the bow beside her, and for the first time since he found her, she spoke openly. About her people, she told him of the Council of Generals who held more power than they should, of how fear had been the tool her empire wielded for generations. She told him of the isolation that came with the crown, how every ally was built on obedience, not trust, how every word spoken to her was shaped to please, not to be honest. Kale listened in silence, his eyes narrowing as the truth spilled out piece by piece. He began to see not just a queen, but a woman suffocating beneath the weight of her throne. He realized that when she asked him why he helped her, it was not only curiosity. It was need. She had wanted to know if kindness still existed beyond the reach of her empire. When she finished, she leaned forward, her golden eyes catching the light of the fire. Kale, you do not understand what you have done by helping me. If they know of it, if my generals discover that their queen was saved by a human scavenger, they will come for you, and they will not stop until you are broken. Kale gave a tired chuckle, though his voice held no humor. Then let them come. I have nothing left for them to take. Her gaze sharpened at his words, as if she saw something in him she had never seen before. Strength not of armies, but of choice. You are a fool, she whispered, though her voice carried no malice. Or maybe you are more dangerous than any of them because you cannot be bought with fear. The fire crackled louder, as if to mark the moment. Kale leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. So tell me, Queen, what happens now? Do you leave with them? Do you return to your throne? Or do you stay here with a man who has nothing but a knife and broken steel? She looked at him long and hard, her lips parting as though to answer, but no sound came, the weight of her choice pressing down heavier than the ruined sky above. In that silence, the night grew colder, the stars watching as the queen of a ruthless empire sat across from a lone human scavenger bound together by broken arrows and the strange twist of fate that had made them allies, though neither knew how long that fragile bond could hold against the storm that was coming. The dawn came with a sky of steel clouds, and Kale felt the weight of it before the first ships appeared. He and the queen had not spoken much through the night. Her words still hung heavy between them. Now the low roar of thrusters shook the ground as vessels of her empire descended. They were larger than the scouts, armored warships that blotted out the light, their shadows falling across the ruined. Soldiers poured out in ranks, their steps like thunder. The fire Kale had built was still smoking when they surrounded it. The queen rose with calm grace, her wounds hidden beneath her armor, her bow slung across her back. The soldiers parted as one. When a figure in black armor approached, his insignia marked him as a general. Kale could see the sharpness in his eyes and the cruel twist of his mouth. He stopped before her and knelt, his head bowed, but his words were hard. My queen, we come to return you to your rightful place. The empire has waited for your command. She said nothing at first, her golden gaze drifting over Kale, who stood silent at her side. The general noticed, and his eyes narrowed. He rose to his full height and pointed a gloved hand toward Kale. And this human, why does he stand beside you? The queen's hand moved slightly toward her bow, but she did not draw it. He is under my protection, she said simply. The general's laughter echoed across the ruins. A human scavenger beneath your protection. How low has our throne fallen, that it depends on the kindness of vermin? Kale's knife was already in his hand, though. He knew it was useless, his jaw clenched, but he did not step back. The queen's voice cut through the air, sharper than any blade. He saved my life when none of you were here. He mended my weapons when I had nothing. He is not vermin, he is more loyal than any of you who kneel out of fear. The soldiers shifted uneasily, their discipline cracking at the sound of her words, but the general sneered. You speak of gratitude, my queen, yet gratitude is weakness. The empire is built on fear and conquest, and if this human remains alive, that weakness will spread through the stars. He turned to his soldiers and raised his hand. Seize him, execute him here and now. Let the stars see that mercy has no place in our rule. The command rang out and the soldiers advanced. Kale tightened his grip on the knife, but the queen stepped forward. her bow in hand, one of the arrows he had reforged, already drawn, its glow pulsing with deadly light. Her voice roared across the field. "Any who touch him will face my wrath." The soldiers froze their eyes, darting between their queen and their general. The tension crackled like fire in dry grass. Kale felt the weight of her words pressing into the air she had chosen to stand for him. Against her own people, the general's face twisted with fury. "You would betray centuries of power for the sake of one human." She answered without hesitation. "I would end centuries of chains for the sake of truth." Her defiance silenced the ranks, but it lit the general's rage like flame. He drew his blade, its edge glowing with energy, and pointed it at Kale. "Then let the human prove his worth. Let him face me in combat. If he wins, he lives. If he falls, your debt dies with him." Kale's heart pounded in his chest. The knife felt small in his hand, but he met the general's gaze without stepping back before he could speak. The queen's voice cut through once more. "No, Kale does not answer to you. He does not need to prove himself." But Kale placed a hand on her arm, steady and calm. "If I do not fight, he will never stop hunting me if I fight. Maybe I show him that humans do not break so easily." Her eyes burned as if she would argue, but she saw the resolve in his face and lowered her bow, though her hands trembled. He stepped forward into the circle the soldiers had formed, his knife glinting under the cold morning light. The general smiled as if victory was already his. But Kyle stood firm, his heart steady, not because he believed he could win, but because he refused to bow. The queen watched with fire in her chest, torn between the duty of a ruler and the bond of someone who had saved her. Her empire demanded she let the trial decide. Her heart demanded she end it before it began. She lifted her bow but stopped, her golden eyes never leaving Kale as he faced the storm. She whispered words only he could hear, carried by the wind. "Do not fall, human. You are more than they will ever understand." And so the field of ruin became the stage for a battle that would decide not only Kale's life, but the shape of her empire's future. The circle of soldiers tightened as Kale stepped forward. His knife gripped in his hand, the general in black armor towered above him, his weapon gleaming with cruel light. The air carried silence heavy enough to crush the breath from those who watched. Kale's heart beat steady, each thump echoing through his chest. But his eyes never wavered. He had faced hunger, storms, and endless nights alone. He would not cower before another man, no matter how much power his empire carried. The general lunged first, his blade cutting arcs through the air, swift and merciless. Kyle ducked and rolled, the strike slicing only. Dust he slashed with his knife, but it barely scratched the glowing armor sparks scattering like fireflies. The general laughed, a harsh sound. "This is the strength you protect, my queen, this fragile creature." Kale did not answer. His breath came, sharp, but his feet stayed moving, never standing still, never offering the general the easy strike he wanted. The soldiers around them murmured as they watched, some with scorn, others with unease, for every time the general struck and missed, Kale rose, again battered but unbroken. Kale's knife struck again, glancing off metal but forcing the general to shift balance. The human's endurance was unnatural, his will unyielding. Even when blows knocked him to his knees, he pushed back to his feet, wiping blood from his mouth and meeting his enemy's eyes with fire. The queen's hands trembled around her bow. Every instinct screamed to end it with a single arrow. Yet she held back, watching him stand again and again against impossible odds. Her chest tightened as she realized what the generals would never understand. This was humanity's strength, not power of weapons or fleets, but the refusal to surrender, the refusal to bow. The general grew impatient. His strikes faster, angrier, he raised his blade high for a killing blow, but in his fury he left a gap. Kyle saw it in an instant. He threw himself forward, his knife driving between the seams of the black armor. It pierced flesh. The general gasped, eyes wide with shock. Kyle twisted, the blade with every ounce of strength he had left, and the mighty soldier fell to his knees, blood dark against the dust. The silence that followed was louder than the clash of battle. The soldiers stared at the human who now stood over their fallen general chest, heaving shoulders, trembling but still alive. The queen stepped forward, her golden eyes blazing. She raised her voice across the ranks. "You see him, a human with nothing but a blade, stood against one of your greatest, and did not break. You call him weak, yet he has shown you what true strength is." The soldiers shifted, many bowing their heads unable. To meet her gaze, the queen lifted her bow and placed one of Kale's reforged arrows to the string. Its glow steady with both human steel and alien crystal. She raised it high for all to see. This arrow is broken and remade like him. Like us, we are not bound by fear. We are not chained by conquest. From this day, mercy is not weakness, it is our future. Her words rolled across the field like thunder. The soldiers who once looked only to fear now saw a queen who defied tradition for truth. She turned to Kale, her voice soft enough only he could hear. You have changed more than you know, Kale. You gave me back more than arrows. You gave me the strength to stand against them. Kale wiped blood from his lip and gave her a tired grin. All I did was fix what was broken. The soldiers knelt, then not from fear but from the weight of her choice the general lay fallen. The empire's path forever altered by the hand of a scavenger who refused to bend. The queen reached for Kale and helped him stand, her touch firm. Her golden eyes steady with new fire above them. The warships hovered, no longer symbols of terror, but of change. Kale stood at her side, bruised, battered, yet unbroken, as the queen of a feared empire declared before. All that a human had saved her, and in doing so had saved them all. The winds carried her words across the ruins, and for the first time in centuries her empire trembled, not from fear, but from hope. And so a scavenger who repaired broken arrows became the spark that shifted the stars. His name spoken quietly at first, then louder as a symbol that even the smallest voice could change the fate of empires. Kale did not seek a throne nor power, only the simple truth that broken things deserved another chance. The queen would carry that truth into the heart of her empire, and the galaxy itself would never be the same again. The battlefield held its breath as Kale stood inside the ring of soldiers, his knife shaking in his hand, yet his stance unbroken. The general in black armor towered before him, his weapon glowing with the strength of a warship engine. Every strike he made shook the ground, but still, Kale rose again, blood dripping from his brow, his chest heaving, but his eyes locked with fire that would not fade. The soldiers who watched began to whisper, unease growing with every moment. This fragile human refused to kneel, refused to yield. The general laughed as he struck again his blade. A streak of light. Kyle fell to his knees, but before the final blow could fall, he surged forward, his body burning with pain yet driven by something deeper. His knife found the seam in the black armor. It sank deep, and the general's laughter ended in a choked breath. Kyle twisted with every ounce of strength, and the giant fell crashing to the ground in silence. The soldiers froze their eyes wide at the sight. A human had brought down one of their greatest warriors, not with fleets, not with advanced weapons, but with will alone. The queen stepped into the circle, her cloak flowing behind her. Her bow in hand, she raised one of the arrows. Kale had reforged the light within it. Steady bright with both her people's power and human steel, she lifted her voice so all could hear. You see, what you feared is not weakness, what you despised is not worthless. This man, this human with nothing but a blade, stood against one of your strongest, and he endures. He shows you that strength is not in fear, but in the will to rise again. The soldiers lowered their heads, some in shame, some in awe. They had seen victory built on cruelty, but never on defiance like this. The queen's voice rang louder. From this day, the empire will not be ruled by fear alone. Mercy will not be weakness. Compassion will not be shame, for if one human can stand unbroken, then so can we. She turned to Kale, her golden eyes softer than he had ever seen, and said for him alone, You gave me back my arrows, but more than that, you gave me back my strength, my truth, my choice. Kyle swayed on his feet but managed a weary smile. All I did was fix what was broken. The soldiers knelt. Then, not in terror but in acceptance, the warships above hovered no longer as threats, but as witnesses to change. The queen raised her hand in command, and the empire shifted in that moment, its heart altered by the will of a scavenger who refused to bow. Kyle stood beside her, not as servant, not as subject, but as the one who had reminded her that even broken things could rise again. And so the queen of a feared galactic empire returned not as the ruler of chains, but as the bearer of hope, carrying the lesson of a human whose strength was simple, yet unstoppable. The galaxy would speak his name in whispers, then in, shouts Kale the scavenger who fixed arrows and altered empires. Kale the man who reminded even queens that true power lay not in fear, but in choice. The stars shone brighter above the ruins, as if to mark the moment of change. And in the silence that followed a new future was born the end.